To provide some insight into how that may work, our guest tonight is Sheikh Wessam Chikawi, a high school chaplain working in Western Sydney. Sheikh Chikawi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Look, you work with young men and women every day at a high school. Do you think giving them a better understanding of Middle Eastern politics and Australia's role in the region will help them to be less attracted to radical ideas?
Look, in principle, yes, I do. However, introducing this into the curriculum might be somewhat problematic based on two things: content and facilitator. What will the content comprise of and who will facilitate it? I mean, you could have any student, once you start to open up the topic, question the teacher and say, what is the point of view from a jurisprudent point of view that shows that accepting these groups is invalid? And then you've opened up a doorway where the teacher needs to have some background in the Islamic sciences, and that may prove problematic, because if the teacher doesn't have that background, he might advise the student in a particular way which might be counterintuitive to what is trying to be achieved. And so I do think it's problematic. If this program or the undertakings are going to be accepted, what I definitely believe is it has to be done in consultation with the Islamic leadership. And that's very, very important, because who facilitates and who provides. And if it's going to come into the curriculum as a de-radicalisation program, what you have automatically from the outset is you're going to sideline people. People don't want to partake in that. There's no doubt about it that people will be sidelined and people won't want to engage in that type of discussion.
Because they see that it's steering them in a particular way.
Well, it is. It's not only, but it's framing this narrative. It's framing this. I mean, people ask me all the time, do you run any de-radicalisation programs? And I tell them no. They say, what do you do? I say, look, I teach Islam. The very bedrock of Islam is against extremism or any form of extremism. So once you teach that and you teach virtuosity, it by default counters any form of extremism. So I think it's very important to keep in mind. So when you call something de-radicalisation program, it does have adverse ramifications and implications that people often won't partake with that or in that.
What about sort of Middle Eastern politics generally and Australia's role in the region? How much do students learn about that at school?
Look, I mean, I get questions all the time, and the kids, there's a great feeling of trust there. I think at some point there is a level of trust here. And over the many years, and especially many months, there's been a complete withering away of that trust. I mean, this goes back a long way away. If we take ourselves 4 months, four months ago, when, for example, the Prime Minister said, "I've heard people often describe Islam as peaceful, and the imams should say it more and mean it." This caused so much offence to Muslims in the community, because what it was actually saying is, or implying that you are duplicitous or deceitful. Very, very hurtful. He may have intended something else, but definitely it caused a lot of pain in the hearts of the community, and it was something that should not have been articulated.
Listen, I think education is great. Any answering, honestly, questions from inquisitive students is great, but what we're confronted with here now is an online phenomenon. A lot of young people go onto these graphic videos that are still available online, and they are radicalised through that. Here we are in Australia, stuck down here near the South Pole, with 600,000 Muslims, and a potential, this has already been recognised by the security agencies, a great potential for jihadi recruitment. Not only young men, but young women. So I'm really looking at exactly what can be done by the Muslim community itself to on the counter radicalisation through online messages. Islamic State slaughters Muslims. Islamic State slaughters Muslims, and to try to get around any adventurism that would come from people examining this online material would be very important for us to do, and that could only come from an inclusive Muslim community.
I mean, that point is very well taken, and we've been saying for a very, very long time. That report, it highlighted many things that have been said by the majority of the Islamic community, which is you can't sideline the people that are countering the narrative of what groups like ISIS is pushing. I mean, you have ISIS at the moment, or other extremist groups, trying to push this narrative of validity, that from an Islamic viewpoint, it's valid. Whereas the counter to that is the Islamic leadership saying, no, it's not valid, and here's why. you can't alienate the people who are, who can debunk this argument, and they definitely need to be on side, and that's become very, very problematic. When you have rhetoric, and very strong rhetoric, that alienates the Islamic community, it serves problematic, and it's unhelpful. And so you need to have, I remember the Attorney General was saying that the Muslims are our partners. Well, the recommendations have to be enacted upon. The recommendations, are always forthcoming, but to date, I haven't seen one recommendation enacted upon. And so you can't, that narrative needs to be countered, and it's a very potent force, and it shouldn't be besieged or isolated in the way that it has been.
Do you see that the high production values in some of these videos that are posted by those extremist groups need to be countered by, a message that's produced just as well, and that is reaching kids who are at risk? Or do you think it's more about not undermining the leadership that's already providing that kind of message to them?
Look, I definitely believe the messages have been thick and fast from the scholars, from the imams, from the sheikh. Every sermon, there was dedication to a sermon when it was national. Every sermon in Australia was occupied to give a speech on this particular topic. So there have been classic legal edicts from the Mufti, from all the scholars, from the organisations, so on and so on and so forth. And what the academics tell us is that there is a level, at some point, there's human interaction. At some point, there is human interaction. And where there is human interaction, so it starts by an individual possibly asking other people. And when you have the information and the scholars and the imams and the organisations countering this narrative in a very strong way, and they have been working diligently ever since September 11. It's not like people have relaxed. What the Prime Minister said about 4 months ago was factually incorrect and morally problematic. It was factually incorrect. I don't think anybody has really had a rest since September 11 in the messages that they have been advocating. So the messages have been really strong in countering what has been propagated by extremist groups.
Now, Sheikh Wassam, I think Catherine Murphy has a question for you.
I'm just interested, it's fraught territory obviously, and very fraught territory, but what's your view on any role that could be played by people, Australians returning from the conflict in Syria and Iraq with communities in Australia? I know we're having a citizenship stripping debate in which the Prime Minister says he wants to enact the modern form of banishment. But do you see any productive role in some of these returning people speaking to communities about real-world experiences that they've had over there? Obviously, if these people are genuinely remorseful or have had dreadful experiences, do you see any positives, or is it just too fraught?
Well, look, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a question that you really have to put to the academics. And what the evidence shows. And if you look across the world, there are some countries that have diversion programs. So some people have returned into particular countries and have proved very effective in how they've dealt with people in the countries. And so I haven't seen the proof or the evidence, but we have a legal system, and the legal system is well equipped to deal with people who do come back and return. They are subject to the law. You're talking about citizenship. We have a strong legal system that can definitely deal with people who return. I think what we need really to let go of is this dichotomy of a them and us type of mentality. I think it's very, very problematic in having this dichotomy exist. But what the academics tell us is that in some instances it can prove effective, and in other instances they should be subject to the law. So I'll leave that to what the academics spell out in that regard.